All right, so today we're going to go into the numbers of my previous year. So this is kind of my last wrap-up video of 2022, where we just go into the stats. The number of books, who wrote them, what genre, all of that. And I use my own spreadsheet. It's really not that interesting. If I have the spoons, I will link a spreadsheet that I based it off of, but like, it's really not that exciting of an Excel spreadsheet. It's just a spreadsheet that I keep, and I keep manipulating it so it does like very specific things to my needs, which is, I don't think, intuitive. There are definitely better ways to manipulate this Excel sheet than how I do it, but it is what it is. So we're gonna get into it, maybe reflect a little. I do have a more like casual, chatty reflection video that does like at least talk about number of books in a month, average rating, and the highs and lows specifically. I don't remember what I called that video, but it's like a reflection video. I'll have that in the end of the year playlist down below. But this, we're just gonna get into the numbers. So how many books did I read? It's around 162. I think on my story graph it's 164 because I think I added two things there that I didn't add here because they just felt too short to add here. I don't mind adding short story collections or novels or novelettes per se, but like when it's only 20 pages, it's like weird to me to like consider that like a full book. Like it's something I've read, but like it doesn't necessarily help me when I'm like parsing out my stats or anything like that. So around 162 at around 62,000 pages, and that includes audiobook pages for that number. And so apparently the average page number per book I read is around 385, which sounds right. I think that's like the average length of a book. And I read a lot of fantasy books that are pretty large, and I then sometimes read a lot of like literary or contemporary that are kind of short, and then I had a lot of novellas. So like this average feels right to me. And apparently my average star rating is 4.1. And this is like a thing that I'm thinking about because I don't think I'm rating books in a way that's helpful to me. And ratings have always been for me, so I might be updating how I do my ratings. I don't know. If I actually update what my star ratings mean, I'll make a new what my star ratings mean video. But until I actually do that, we'll see. I'm still right now playing around with it, but I don't think a 4-star rating is meaning what I want it to mean right now. Like, I think I'm treating it a little bit too much like a participation trophy, if that makes sense. And I think I should use that more for like my 3.5 stars. Because I still want like 4-star and above to be like, I'm so happy I had this reading experience. And I don't think all of my 4 stars fit into that mindset right now. So I need to change how I give those out because I don't feel like this was a 4.1 star reading year. Like truly, that's not how I feel. And maybe part of this is that I haven't like updated my ratings. Like I can check real quick on StoryGraph. On StoryGraph, it's 4.03 because I like kind of adjusted ratings because if you don't know, my StoryGraph, like I have some friends over there, but it's like very much like my own personal tracking thing. And on Goodreads is where I eventually post reviews about everything I read and their ratings there and links to videos. So my Goodreads is where you should follow me if you want to like actually have useful information. My StoryGraph is just me being messy, and it's very lovely. But there, when I then think of a book that I haven't read for 3 months, I'll be like, actually, this was an X rating. And normally it almost trended downward. So 4.03, and I do think when I looked, that's lower than previous years. So that like makes a little more sense. But I just feel like if my average rating is a 4, then it should have felt like a 4-star reading year, and that's not how it felt to me. So obviously I'm not thinking about things appropriately, or like my lows are way lower than I think they are, and I need to adjust. In terms of books read per month, let's look at this graph. It's generally what I expect based off my reading year. I had my defense in March, and so reading was an escape, and you can definitely see that. And like after my defense, I think I just didn't know what to do with myself, and I was really stressed about job hunting, so I just read a lot. That was like my source of productivity. And so I think it fulfilled me in that way, but like I didn't like any of the things I was reading in like a memorable way, except for like a handful of things. And then May and June, we take a nosedive because of health reasons, because of moving, because of mental health, all of those things. And then we get back more to like business as normal. Like I am an average 12-ish book a month person, if we really look at this. I don't like when I'm reading 17 or some books a month. I need to not let that happen on average, unless I'm really loving what I'm reading. But the months where I was really loving what I'm reading were the months where I read like 12 books. So obviously something has to give. Pages read per month also really reflects this. And this is actually pages read via physical reading. Or immersion reading, but not just audiobook. And I think it's like really interesting because you can really see where I lean on audiobooks sometimes. So for example, April is not that different from March, even though there's 3 more books. So there's obviously a lot of audiobooking there, but more so I read 13 books in December, but I only physically read 1,200 pages, which is my lowest physical reading. And I mentioned this in my December wrap-up. I was not sitting down to read books. No, if it wasn't an audiobook, it wasn't happening. But it looks like on average physical reading time is like between 3,000 and 4,000, and I like it when it's in that space. Like August was my favorite reading month, and I read like 3,700 pages with my eyeballs. And there were sometimes audiobook immersion with that, I think, but like I consider it when I'm sitting down and only reading. That's what I'm trying to calculate with this pages read per month sort of number. That's what I'm trying to capture. We can then get into, I guess, formats, because we were just kind of talking about that. So how do I read? And I think I need to add like a fifth part of the pie chart for next year, because I just sometimes read however makes sense. So sometimes that's only with my eyeballs, sometimes it's immersion, sometimes it's only audio, and sometimes it's a mix of all of those things. And I've put in here physical, Kindle, immersion, and audiobook. And it's crazy. Like, I truly do read almost equally of all of those things. But also, audiobook made it to 30% of my reading, which I think is maybe comparable. But if we include that with the immersion pie, over 50% of the things I read, I listened to it as part of the experience, which is a change of pace. And I really do like immersion reading. I did look to see, and let's see, I have the numbers. It's kind of interesting, but I don't know if it's actually that interesting. So I will explain that for Kindle, my average rating was a 3.9. For physical, it was a 4.2. Immersion was 4.17, and audiobook was also 3.92. And, like, I have some theories for why there is this discrepancy. Like, 3.9 to 4.2 kind of seems wide. I think part of it is I don't typically get physical books unless I really want to read it. Like, there's this extra emphasis on me purchasing the book or getting it physically from the library. That's an extra step. It's extra effort, which means there's something that makes me want to read it more, and maybe that's just, like, I know I'm going to love it, or something like that, or I was excited and I bought it. Like, there's something else there. Immersion reading, I really like immersion reading. Like, if the audio narrator's good, so, like, I can see why that's also kind of up there, because it's just, like, a really enhanced experience for me when it works really well. I am just kind of surprised that, like, both Kindle and audiobook are 3.9, but I do think those are the formats where if I'm in, okay, you need to push through and finish this book for X obligation or whatever, those are the formats where I do that. Because it's really easy to just put a book on my Kindle or my phone or just finish the audiobook. So I think that's why, but it's still like relatively close. But it was something I did want to look at this year. Now we will get into my series and standalones. This is how I kind of keep track of how much I'm reading across series and standalones and short stories. And so if we look at this chart, 38% of what I'm reading are standalone books, or what I qualify as standalone books. That's like 62 of the 162, so not bad. And 50% of the time I'm reading a series, and the majority of it I spend starting series, which I feel like is normal, but I do spend like 12% of my reading time finishing series and like 17% of it in the middle of them. So, and that kind of shows when I like do my series wrap-ups my end of the year that I keep up with my series. It's really not like a big deal. I'm not having such a huge problem opening up so many series that I feel like I need to suddenly have a goal where I'm like, okay, you need to focus on what you started. I'm sure one year that might happen to me, but so far, no red flags. All right, I don't think I showed the chart for my ratings, but here it is. And like, as you can see, it's just so many 4 stars, and like, I don't actually think all of those are 4 stars. I feel like more of those needed to be in like the 3.5, but I just like, for so long in my reading life, if I finished a book in my head, I'm like, well, it must have been at least 4 stars. Like, that was a large part of my reading life, but that worked better for me in terms of like capturing my feeling of a read or a reading year when I only read 30 books a year. But now that I read over 100 books a year, this isn't really working for me in terms of like reflecting and capturing how I feel. Like, it's not useful. And that's why I rate books. Like, I mean, I share these numbers with you guys because if you know how I rate things, you know, in theory, that's helpful for you. But I have always rated books for myself. Because then it helps me when I look back being like, oh, how did I feel in that moment? And this is not helpful to me, because if I were to look at this graph in the future, I'd be like, oh, look at this amazing reading year. So many of these things are 4 stars and above, and that's not reflective. Book source. This is a year where I only borrowed 50%. My first year in BookTube, I was borrowing like 75%. I was so good at it. But I own a lot more books now, and I also do some ARCs. ARCs weren't as big this year as they were last year, but I think part of that is like, I still read a bunch of new releases, as we will see in a graph. But I think I just kind of wait to hear some buzz and then I'll pick them up, but I will read arcs of things I really like. And I do run a local book club where I get money each month to buy books at that bookstore, so I'll just I'm more likely to purchase books. And then when you have friends like Evie, who if you just mention a book, she will get serotonin for herself and me by buying it. My owned book collection has also just grown. But in general, I don't know if this graph has ever been very interesting to me other than keeping track of how often I use the library, which is why I have it so bare bones. I don't care where the owned books are coming from so much. It's more just am I using my library or am I using my own collection, and am I getting arcs? Those are the three piles that I kind of care about, sort of. So then back to the graph of years published, because I did just talk about that. Surprising no one, the vast majority of my reads were published 2016 to now, and 37 of them were published in 2022. So I read a lot of modern books, and 44 of them were published 2020 to now. So math, I think 81 of my reads, so over half my reads, were released in this decade. Because that is who I am. I'm not mad about it. I love reading modern things. I think maybe I looked at the ratings, and my ratings problem did not happen because I'm reading modern things. Actually, my lowest rated reading year was 2012 to 2015 with a 3.583. That had a rough time. Basically, everything from 2016 and up was 4+ rating. 4.18, 4.19, 4.1. Although it did show that 2022 is the lesser of those. So comparatively to other modern years, not as strong, which I feel like we've all been feeling but not been able to quantify, but I've for sure been having more luck with more recent modern, but not this year. But all of my basket lists, they're not all bad, but they're all in the 3-star average range, which just proves to me that I'm right, that I'm a modern reader, and I like reading modern things. I don't dislike dabbling in the past and seeing the foundational roots and everything like that. That's not a waste of my time. But I am less likely to find things that I really love, which, I'm not surprised at. All right, we will now look at genres, which I started tracking for myself because this is a graph I don't really like how Storygraph does it. Surprising nobody, my top 2 pies are fantasy and science fiction, but what makes me happy is I actually read them almost equal this year, which really brings me joy. 68 fantasy and 52 science fiction, but that's still pretty comparable, especially with how genre blendy my life is. Sometimes I just pick one because it's hard. But yeah, and then horror definitely had a boost this year. Read 10 horror books, which was really fun. And I did look at the ratings per section, and unsurprisingly, things that were not horror, sci-fi, or fantasy were just average on lower. Literary and historical were not nearly the same ratings, which I'm not surprised at. They're not my genres. Similarly with romance, and I think I was talking a little bit in my wrap-up, and I think I have to just change how I choose to read romance when I'm in the mood, because it does really affect my reading experience, which kind of leads me to a stat I really want to track next year. I don't know what it'll reveal, if anything, but how long I spend reading a book. And then I can correlate that to what rating it has. Because I have this theory that for some genres, that time means I might like it more or less. And there probably is a sweet spot. Probably reading a book for 20 days is too long. But equally, reading it for maybe 3 days, if it's an 800-page book, is probably too short for me and my reading taste. And it depends on the book. I'm just curious what that data might reveal. So that's a new thing I might look into. Because the romance reading definitely had me thinking about it. It's the amount of time in which I take to read a story can impact how much I still care about it, depending on what it is. But I don't know what that might be. It's more of a feeling, so I'm going to collect some data. See if there's anything to reveal. This next graph it's not super interesting to me because it's just page length, and I think I just read the average page length of books. If you look at this, it's oh look, the peak is at the average length of a book from 300 to 400 pages. I did read some chunky things and stuff like that, and I read some short things. But, I think it's a pretty standard bell curve based off how things work. So I think those are all the stats on the books. And so we'll now get into the authors. So my author gender breakdown is female, male, non-binary, and multiple, if I read an anthology or a book written by multiple authors. Still, the vast majority of what I read is by people who identify as female, 66%. Only 24% is by male. I did have 5, and this is all unique authors, so I'm not duplicating anything here. I went through my stat sheets, and so if you notice, if you were to for some reason, I don't know why you would, but if you were to add all these numbers up, it would not be 162. I think it'd be closer to like 111 or 108. It gets weird with the multiple authors situation. So I had 5 non-binary authors and 6 works that had multiple authors, and some of those would have been male, female, and non-binary, but I wasn't going to parse that. So I still have this nebulous goal of maybe reading more works by male authors, and I did look. There's no like average rating difference between the two groups. I didn't actually compare it to the non-binary authors because I'm not going to make those 5 authors stand for their entire gender, whereas I have 27 and 73. But they're both like in the 4s, so it's not an author situation. It's just finding, I think, works that really interest me consistently, especially in the new release space, because I did try, especially in fantasy, some new works by new fantasy authors who are men, but I also DNF'd them. So I think I'm just trying to figure it out. Author race, I'm still meeting my goal of having 50% or more be authors of color, which is a very broad umbrella term. Like, I'm using it in a very broad sense. It's like, if they are not white, they go into this category. And this came from my first year of BookTube. I struggled in my first quarter stats video. I was like, what? I've only read 6 books by people of color, and like 5 of them were Jemison. So I was just like, yeah, no, we're gonna make this a more intentional goal. And now I do it without thinking, which is what I wanted. A new thing I tracked this year, and I don't know if this is really interesting, but I think I at least met my goal. I wanted to read 10 works by people who were not born in the United States, and I definitely met that. And I read from a fair few countries, and this year, if you watch my goals video, I have like a more specific goal of looking into South America, and maybe, depending on how that works, I might try, different regions or continents. I don't know. I'll figure it out as I go, because some continents are huge. Like, Africa deserves more than 1 year of my time. If that makes, it's like 50 plus countries, like, and the history, so rich, so vast. But here, by continent, unsurprisingly, 76% were North American. We have 11% in Europe, 7% Asia, 5% South America, and 1% Oceania. And Oceania, I believe that was New Zealand, because I read Nalini Singh. All right, and if we look into author nationality, we can really get into the nuts and bolts of what countries I was reading from. And I always want to read from more, but this is at least, when I compare things from year to year, a starting point to know, where I've been. So we have China, Italy, France, Ukraine, Singapore, United Kingdom, Canada, Venezuela, Brazil, United States, Vietnam, India, Chile, Argentina, New Zealand, Iceland, Malaysia, and Nigeria. So always want to be expanding that. I already said that I'm working on my South American goal, so that should be interesting. It probably will mean, like, I'm still going to plan to read outside of the United States in general. But we'll see how that affects this chart when I have, like, a more intentional region that I'm focusing on. But those are the stats, my reflections on those stats. Like I said, I think the main thing I'm going to change is I want to see if I can consistently track how many days that I spend reading each book. And luckily, I'm good enough with my story graph of, like, logging in when I start a book and finish it that I can always use that if I forget to, like, update my spreadsheet. Because if you keep a spreadsheet, you know that you are not as on top of it as you want to be. But that's this video. Are there any things that you find interesting to track? If there is anything you think I should track that's like relatively easy, I could do it. Maybe. I don't know. Now's the time to let me know, and if I think it's a cool enough idea, I'll put it in the stat sheet. But that's it for this video. If you want to leave an emoji, there's usually a bar chart, or I don't think there's a pie graph, because whenever I say that, people leave pies. But I'm okay with that too. So if you want to leave a pie or a bar chart, or I don't know, something numerical, feel free as the emoji. Just let me know you're here if you don't have any thoughts. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.